Welcome to Paid Vocation. This week on the podcast, I am so excited to be joined by Ellen Yin. Ellen is the founder of Cubicle to CEO, a globally ranked top 100 entrepreneurship podcast and media platform, asking successful founders business questions you can't Google. Cubicle to CEO's media channels, podcast, social, blog, and email newsletter reach a global audience of 100,000 women monthly. Ellen and her work have been featured in Forbes, the Today Show with Hoda and Jenna, Real Simple Magazine, and 100 plus other publications. Ellen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I like to start every interview by asking guests, as a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
That's a great question. I wanted to be a lot of different things as a
Hmm.
child. However, there is a through line, I think, in all of the types of dream jobs or careers that I imagine for myself. And that really is all rooted in storytelling and writing.
Ah,
So, from a very young age, I was a voracious reader. I was that nerd that, like, on winter break, I beg my mom to take me to the library and I check out like bags full of books and
same,
read through them
same.
all. I love that. And I see your beautiful bookshelf of color lined books behind you. Anyways, yes, loved reading. I read aloud a lot as a kid. There's like these old home videotapes of me just reading to an empty room of stuffed animals. I just loved to like narrate the different voices. And yeah, I was always just very into the world of storytelling. And I
Hmm.
think throughout my childhood, I thought, oh, it'd be great to be an author or to eventually, like as I grew a little bit older in middle school and beyond, I was really set on wanting to be a journalist and wanting specifically to work in broadcast journalism in entertainment news. And that's actually what I originally went to school for in college. My freshman year, I studied at USC and was a broadcast journalism major, but I took a different path and I ended up transferring back home to where I grew up in Oregon and went to a state school there. They didn't have a journalism program, so I ended up having to switch my major to something completely different. But that desire to work with people and interview people really never left me. And so I feel like I get to do that in a manner now through my podcast, through Cubicle to CEO. So that's kind of a little glimpse into what I was like as a kid.
Well, and that was going to be my next question. How do you think that all connects to what you do today?
Absolutely. So the podcast really is just another form of media, right? And I think
Yep.
it's interesting because even growing up, podcasting has been around for a few decades, but it's still a relatively newer media platform. And
Yeah.
so I don't even think I knew about podcasts. Well, I for sure did not know about podcasts as a kid. And then I don't think I really even was aware of them until maybe later in college. But even then, I wasn't an active consumer at the time because it just
Yep.
wasn't super mainstream yet. I couldn't have even imagined it if I wanted to as a
Mhm.
kid, but now I see so many connections to my past and what I get to do for work every day.
And then the way you just communicate so beautifully. I met Ellen at a conference here in the Dallas area, and she had flown in for the conference, a creative educator conference. And Ellen was one of the speakers. And I was just so blown away by the way you communicate,
Thank
the
you.
the words you use, the professionalism. And I could see that being really successful in traditional broadcast journalism. So I can see how you've had so much success in the podcast form because you show up really authentically.
Thank you. I really appreciate your words. And it's funny you say I could see this in a more standard format because that dream hasn't left me, if I'm being honest. My ultimate dream someday is still to host my own television show. And I don't
Mm,
know what format that would look
right.
like. I don't know if that would be on cable television or if it would be on a streaming site, since, again, something that
It
didn't
is.
exist when we were younger. But I for sure still hold that vision in my heart.
Mhm. So your podcast is called Cubicle to CEO.
Yes.
Tell us about your own journey from cubicle to CEO.
So I was only in a cubicle for 10 months. It was my first and last corporate job. I was 23 when I started the job, and I quit a couple days before Christmas in 2017. So I had graduated college in June 2016. Right after college, I had a full time job already lined up with a fitness startup that I had interned for and then eventually started working part time while I was still in school. And then they offered me a full time position right after I graduated, which was wonderful. I had such a great experience working
Mm,
on that team, and I think that was kind of like planting the seeds maybe of
mm,
entrepreneurship and small
mm,
business for me because I got to work in a startup. I worked very closely with the founders, and I had a lot of creativity, a lot of free space to innovate and to really wear a bunch of different hats, which in a corporate job, typically that's not the case, right? You have a very
Sure.
defined role within an organization and there's a lot more bureaucracy involved. When I transitioned to this corporate job, I very quickly felt that it was not the right fit for me. A, because of the industry that I was in, it was a health insurance company. And as you can imagine, that's one of the most highly regulated industries. And so,
Mm,
even though I worked in marketing, I was very stifled in my creativity. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room that you can say about certain products or plans. And you have to just be very mindful of how you communicate with your members, which makes a lot of sense. Like, of course, you want to protect them. But for me, it didn't feel like the right fit from day one. And I was kind of waiting it out. And I realized about halfway through that staying longer wouldn't change the outcome of how I felt.
mm, mm,
Being there for a year, 2 years, 5 years, I wasn't going to grow. I wasn't going to feel differently. So I thought, why drag this out just so it looks neat and tidy on my resume, right? That's
mm,
what people kept telling me. You've got to stay at least a year. You don't want to look like you're jumping jobs. So, against my well meaning parents and other people's best advice, I chose to leave at 10 months. I quit. And I quit without a backup plan. So oftentimes people think I left my job because I wanted to start a business. I didn't even have any inclination to start a business. I
mm,
just thought I'm going to quit and I'm going to give myself some space and room to apply for a job in marketing at another company that I feel like is better aligned with my interests. And it just so happened during that job search period at the beginning of 2018, my husband actually helped facilitate this conversation between myself and a colleague at the job I had just left. Him and his wife own these local coffee stands. And my husband was like, "Hey, Ellen's been looking for another job in marketing, but she's really good at Instagram. She might be able to help you guys out," because he had overheard him talking about how they don't really have a presence on social media. So I decided to pitch them a project and I was like, "Hey, I'll come to your stands. I'll take your pictures." I had this DSLR camera I got a couple years ago as a gift. And I was like, I'm not a photographer, but I was like, I can figure this out. I'll take your photos, I'll create your content and help you grow your presence online. And that was a $300 project that totally changed my life because it made me realize I had a set of skills I could monetize outside of a traditional job. And I realized that if I gave myself the opportunity to lean into this and to put my job search on hold and say, instead of submitting another resume, could I instead go submit another pitch and get
mm.
another client and keep growing this thing? And I did. And here we are 6 years later, and my business has changed drastically. I don't offer marketing services anymore. We're a media business now, but that never would have happened without that first client.
I love that story.
Yeah.
Ellen, as you're telling that story, I'm thinking, wow, that's really bold and courage. Like most people, because I'm a coach, I see even in my own life, like how scary it can be to even go out for that first $300 client, to even
Yeah.
pitch yourself for that first thing. So I'm curious, where do you think that came from? Was it your enthusiasm for social media? What was it that really propelled you to go for it and not say, I should probably stick to the resumes?
I'll be honest, I think a lot of it is innate. I've really given this some thought before because I'm like, is there something that I either practiced or that I learned that helped me feel more forthcoming in making these asks? And really, when I trace it back, it's rooted in my childhood. It's going back again to who
Hmm.
I think I always was. And there's so many examples of in my childhood and early teenage years, me just going out for things that I had no business, to be honest, doing, but I just was like, "Why not?" I would submit myself for casting calls, and I would write to different, like, competitions. I one time cold called the Miss Universe organization and was like, "I wanna interview Miss USA," and they gave me an interview.
Wow.
It was insane. I was like I mean, I was not representing an established publication or anything.
Yeah.
There's just been so many instances in my life where I
Mm,
just if there wasn't an opportunity, I would say, "Well, let's just go create one or let's just figure it out. Let's just ask." And I think the
mm,
reason I do that is because the way I think through it is, look, if I don't make the ask, the answer is no regardless. So I really don't have anything to lose other than maybe a little bit of my ego. If I go out and ask
yeah.
for something and if the answer is no, is that a little embarrassing in the moment sometimes? Sure. But the ultimate outcome doesn't change. And so I'd rather give myself the opportunity for a potential yes than to say no to myself and be the person that stands in my own way.
Well, and then that's interesting with having kind of that natural personality towards action and that it never really was a goal for you to be your own boss.
I know, it's very strange, and I think this is why I'm so passionate about these stories that we cover on our media channels, right? We are really focused on spotlighting female founders, and more specifically, the majority are bootstrapped businesses, and I think that mantra, and I don't remember who first said this, but it's the, "If you can see her, you can be her." I think a lot of the reason why I never considered business or being a business major or pursuing entrepreneurship early on in my life is because I just wasn't exposed to it. I didn't see people around me
Mm,
starting their own businesses, especially not women who looked like me. My mind couldn't really conjure that vision for myself because I
mm,
was not exposed to it. And in my later high school years, my dad did start his own business, but it was almost when I was already leaving for college. And so
mm,
again, like, growing up, I just didn't feel like I was immersed in that world, and I think that's what's so amazing about the kids who are growing up in today's environment where there is so much access to information that you are able to go outside of the socioeconomic class or your geographical region and the limitations that may bring in terms of who you're surrounded by. You can see other people out there,
mm.
unlike the people you may know in real life, doing really cool things, and that just expands your brain and expands your imagination of what's possible.
In my former career, I was an accountant. I was an auditor. I did technical accounting research.
Wow.
And I could see that people around me were really good at it and
Mhm,
they found purpose in it. And I just didn't share that passion. And almost 6 years ago, I left to be a coach and I love it. And I feel so much purpose. And the
mm,
reason I started this podcast was because I want to motivate people to not feel stuck, to take
mhm,
action towards change if that's what they want or that's what they
mhm.
need. So it sounds like you've done that. It sounds like you love what you do.
Yep.
So, what would you say to someone listening who doesn't feel that way, who isn't naturally inclined to take that action?
What I always encourage people with who tend to be more risk apprehensive is I think in life, we're molded to believe that we can plan our way to clarity. If we have this
Mm,
goal, right, for ourselves and we think, okay, if we could just do enough research and plan enough and do
mm,
XYZ steps, then we'll be ready to start. And I think the truth that you have to face is that there is no feeling of true readiness about anything that is different than what you've done before, because it's always going to feel scary the first time you do something, anything, not even just related to business, but just in general, right? This last summer, I got married. That's something new to me. Even though I've been with my husband for 7 years now, getting married is still a different step that we haven't done before, right? So even though he's my best friend, I know him so well, it still feels a little bit scary to step
mm,
into that transition, but it's again, kind of helping yourself understand just because something is scary doesn't mean that you are unqualified. It doesn't mean that you
mm,
are not capable. It does not mean that it is a bad decision. It just means that you're new to it and anything new feels
mm,
scary. And I think the biggest piece of wisdom I wish I could instill in people is that action is what creates clarity, not planning. So, as much as you want to think your way through everything, the truth is it's not till you're in the moment and that feedback and input is coming to you in real time
mm,
that you're able to truly adjust and understand this is what I want and this is not what I want. And
mm,
I think if you kind of view everything as an experiment and you realize, look, here's this outcome that I'm hoping for. And let's say you take action towards it and that outcome doesn't come to fruition. If you were able to gain new insight from that experience and that actually helped you eliminate something. So maybe you're experiencing a process of elimination rather than a process of success in the way that you imagined it. That is still success because by eliminating that, it means you don't have to redo that again, right? You're like, okay, I understand now. That's not what I want. Let me adjust over here. That piece is really, really key for people to understand that yes, planning is important, but planning can only take you so far because you can only plan from the limitations of where you currently stand and who you currently are with your own lived experiences up to this point in your life. And action is the only way forward from there.
yes. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yes. What's coming through, Ellen, is like, wow, there's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. It's the truth. And I've met people who are twice your age, twice our age, right? That have like not figured that out. And so it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that's so powerful.
It is. It's easier said or understood than done, right? And I
Hmm.
don't discount that it is very difficult to put yourself out there for things. But I do truly believe that you only have something to gain by going for it, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's new information or whether it's actually what you wanted.
100%. So as you think about all of that, what's something that you would tell people to try as a first step? Or whatever the goal is, it's whether it's a new role, a new project, dating. It's all really the same too. Like
Get
there's
really
get
curious, I think, is the first step to anything. Get really curious, leave your assumptions at the door. And
mm,
again, that's why also planning can really trap you because you start to
mm,
create all of these false assumptions based on other people's perspectives and maybe not your own. And so
mm,
leave your assumptions at the door, get really curious. And if there's someone in your life or someone, even that you may not personally know, but has done what you are hoping to do, can
mm,
you figure out a way to learn from them, whether it's having a one on one conversation with them, if that is a possibility, if you can pay them for their time, or if they just happen to be very generous and willing to sit down and chat with you, or whether it's maybe they've distilled their knowledge and shared it through their podcast or a book that they wrote, or maybe they're
mhm,
speaking at an event that you can go to and get to witness that in person. But try as much to talk to people who have done what you have and figure out where their dots are connecting. Like, okay, based on this person doing XYZ, who is another person I should talk to? Who's
mm,
someone like, and if you have the chance to talk to them in person, say, who's someone else that you feel I should get connected with, right?
mm,
Or depending on what they've done in their own life, let's say you're listening to their podcast and they're sharing, well, I got my first client because I looked with it. For example, like if you were listening to this podcast right now and you're hearing this and you're going, oh, wow, like I think I have a skill that can be monetized outside of a traditional job too, just like Ellen. And I want to go find my first client and prove to myself that I can make money from this. And you're
mm,
thinking to yourself, well, how did Ellen get her first client? You might again connect the dots for yourself and say, okay, based on the story that I told today, right? I went to someone who I already knew in my existing network who had
mhm,
some sort of need that I felt like my skill set could help support, could provide a solution to. And I made a direct ask to them. I said, actually, I asked him, can I take you to dinner? Can I take you to dinner? And him and his wife, I was like, would you join me for dinner? And I would love to share with you some ideas for what I think I can do to help launch your online presence. And here's how I think
mm,
it's going to return an ROI to your business. And I mean, I kept it pretty simple. It was a Google Doc that I bulleted out these points and I printed out and I brought to this dinner. So nothing fancy, but just thinking through, okay, how could I do that? How could I replicate that in my own life? And then from there, if you do a great job for that first client, how can
mm.
you leverage that case study to go get your next client? How can you ask that person, is there anyone else in your network who you think might benefit from my services? Would you be willing to introduce me to them directly? So sometimes we overcomplicate things and it's really just about simplifying and finding that very first step you can take. And it often comes from being open and being curious.
Yeah, and a few things you said there that I wanna highlight. You said you directly asked.
Hmm.
You said you simplified it, right? It's a Google Doc. And as you were saying that, I thought, this is a $300 project, and you
Yeah.
still took them out to dinner. You still took the time to formally put something on paper,
Hmm.
right? Like, you took it serious.
I
Yes, it
did.
was
Yeah.
simple, but you were trying.
Hmm.
There was
Yeah.
professionalism there.
Yeah. And it's funny because I mean, well, I don't even offer done for you services anymore, but if I
Yeah,
did, I probably at this stage in my business would not be taking every potential client out to dinner, right? And
sure.
oftentimes because we don't live
Of
in the same
course.
place. But I think that's exactly the point, and I'm so glad you brought that up. You have to do the unscalable things at the beginning of your business to be able to build the scalable things later.
Hmm,
There are certain things that
hmm.
you have to do to get really scrappy at the beginning that are going to teach you and accelerate your progress faster. And it may not be something you can maintain forever, but those first few wins are what give you the lift and momentum and experience to go evolve and become a more refined version of yourself and whatever goal you're chasing. So I'm glad you kind of highlighted that for your listeners.
And the other thing that's coming up for me, Ellen, too, is almost like a double side of it. One is that you were humble enough. You didn't think, oh, I have this all figured out. I'm just going to call him on the phone, right? Like you prepared. You weren't already assuming you were going to get it, right?
Yeah.
You wanted to show the ROI to
Mhm.
this project. And then on the flip side, you were also confident because you said, this will be your ROI. This is what I
Yeah.
can do for you. You weren't afraid or scared to say, okay, this is what I can do for you confidently. Right.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to me. You were humble enough to like take them out to dinner or print out something tangible that they could look at. And you were
Mhm.
confident enough to offer your services and to ask for their business, which is a couple of things that I see entrepreneurs who are just starting out struggling with.
I mean, you're not wrong. It's scary, right? It's always scary to make asks of people because you put yourself at the risk of rejection. But I think, again, it's that thing where you have to get comfortable with rejection and reframe your relationship with it and realize that if you're
Mhm.
going to be in the game of entrepreneurship, I think the root of, okay, I could be misremembering this, but I'm pretty sure the root of the word that entrepreneur, the English word, comes from is like a French word that means to undertake risk. That's
Mm,
literally the definition of what it means
mm.
to be an entrepreneur. And
That
so
sounds right. That sounds
right,
right.
we're gonna go with it. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I really feel like that is such a beautiful thing because entrepreneurship is not for everyone, right? That's something I think we have to be realistic about. But if you are going to go down this path, you do have to embrace the risk because that's literally what you're signing up for. So I had the opportunity to interview Noah Kagan recently, who is a very successful serial entrepreneur. His company makes close to $100 million a year. And he was telling me how he sets out to achieve like a no goal. He's like, how many
Mm,
no's am I going to go out and get this
mhm,
week, this month, whatever it may be? And I think when you almost turn it into a game for yourself and it kind of makes it sting a little less, it makes it not so personal, right? It's like,
mm,
I'm going to go out and try to get 10 no's this month because I know to even get to 10 no's, I will have had to put myself out on the line at least 10 separate times, if not more, most likely, right? And even if 10 people say no, just by the sheer act of making yourself available for those
yeah,
opportunities over and over and over again, one of them is bound to turn out to be a yes. And that's an opportunity you probably would have missed had you not showed up to make yourself available for the no. So I loved the way that he reframed rejection. And that's something, has really been top of mind for me now. Anytime I get a no, I'm like, oh, I can just add that to my no list. It's a win for me today. I got another no on my no checklist for my goal this month.
I love that. I heard that from another coach who used to be in sales. He had 25 years of sales, and he
Yeah.
said it's a numbers game. And so
Yeah.
you have to be willing. So if only you get a 25% conversion rate and you only reach out to one person, then you don't have a client, right? So the no's and making it a game, and that means you're putting yourself out there. And then I even think of like dating, right? So that's
Mhm.
someone who wants to meet their person
Mhm.
and they go on one date and it
Mhm.
doesn't work out, right?
Right.
Like, but being willing to say, okay, I'm going to go on, being willing to have dates that
Yeah.
turn into no's, right? That they're not the one,
Yeah.
but then eventually that will lead, hopefully, to meeting the right person. So, and
Yeah.
that involves rejection too.
Yeah.
And so I love that you highlighted that. Another question that's coming up for me, Ellen, is like, how do you keep yourself up? It's intentional work to stay in a
Yeah.
positive, being willing to be rejected. What do you read? What do you listen to? Who do you talk to? Like, what podcasts do you listen to? What's your routine? What do you do to keep yourself in a state that's willing to take risks, to go out
Yeah.
there, to have this beautiful energy that you always kind of
Oh, thank
exude?
you. Thank you so much. It's not easy, and I don't want anyone listening to this podcast to think I'm just this invincible person who never cares if I get a no, who never
Yeah.
feels down. Even very recently, I was actually just having a conversation with my husband about this. In our 6 years of business, we've sold a lot of high ticket, but it's normally to back in our marketing agency days, it was to brands, big brands who had budgets, right, for
Yeah.
marketing services. And then now in our business model as a media company, it's again working with brands through sponsorships and deals. We get like 50% of our revenue comes from brand partnerships. So we're used to selling multiple 4 or 5 figure deals and closing those types of deals with these type of clients. But for the last 4.5 years, the majority of who we sell to is not those high end clients. It's our consumers. It's the small business owner, the solo entrepreneur, the person who's maybe between year 2 to year 5 of running a business. And we sell them primarily lower end digital products, all of our products, right? Previously, even when we had like a coaching program, the highest was still $1,000. Now everything we sell is under $1,000, some under $50. And so because it's been a long, long time since we've, or not even a long time, because we've never really sold anything high ticket to our consumer base. Most recently, we were selling tickets to an intimate retreat that I'm hosting. And this was the first time we ever tested selling something really high ticket to our audience, $10,000 a spot at this retreat, right? I had no idea how it would go. I was like, I
Mhm.
don't know how people are going to react to this. And I had this wait list of like 12, 14 people who had been really, really interested in wanting, they were the ones who actually made me consider putting on a retreat because I'm not really like an events
Sure.
person in the sense, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
usually one planning events and whatnot. So I was like, okay, they kept asking, will you please host something for this over and over again? So I was like, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And then I was so excited because I was like, oh, great. I have these 12 to 14 people who told me they wanted this. So I created this. I went out and I bought out a boutique hotel on the coast, 11 rooms, went back to my wait list and I said, here we go. We're doing this. So here's your deposit to reserve your room. Nothing. Every single person on that wait list, I think, was either not able to make the dates,
Mm.
was not ready to make the investment or whatever thing it was,
Sure.
right? Not right timing, not right this. And I remember feeling so discouraged because I was like, wow, like I created this thing because you guys asked for it. And now you're not signing up. And now I feel like I'm kind of committed to doing this thing, right?
Yeah.
That I'm not sure is going to work out. And so I share the story because I want to again relay to you guys that it's not always sunshine and rainbows over here. I still, even 6 years into this thing, I still have moments where I really doubt myself and I go, am I making a huge mistake here? Like, do people not see the value, whatever it may be? But you know what I did is I went on a trip and this may not be possible for everyone. So maybe, I mean, the trip was already planned. It wasn't because of this thing, but I happened to have a trip planned. The point is, I switched up my environment. So even if for you, that means going to a coffee shop instead of working from home or going on a
Mhm.
walk with your best friend or someone who loves you, just switching up your environment so that you are reminded of who you are outside of this
Mm.
one thing that you've attached your worth to falsely, right? Spending time with people who love you just for who you are, not for what you achieve. That was really helpful. Writing in my journal and really journaling through my thoughts and going, I'm making this out to be like a doomsday scenario. Is
Mm.
this really a doomsday scenario? Like, really writing out if the worst case scenario happened and literally the retreat comes in mid May and still no one has bought, what is the worst thing that could happen in that
Mm.
moment? And I wrote down, okay, so we would lose like however much money it was on the actual venue. Could I recoup that? Yes. And then it was like, okay, now I have 11 rooms. Could I turn this into something really fun? Could I maybe invite my favorite clients I've ever had to
Mm.
have a free stay as like a client experience thing? Could I invite my best friends and have a weekend at the coast together? Could we turn this into something else if it doesn't work out the way I had initially hoped? Once I started journaling and really thinking through this, I was like, okay, we're not in as doomsday of a scenario as I thought
Yes.
I was, right? And you know what? As soon as I started to get away from that fear, that scarcity, and I started to feel encouraged again, I went out and I sent out, I think in one day, 14 individual pitches to I made a list of everyone in my network
Mm.
who wasn't like, I didn't obviously include the people who already said no on the wait list.
Sure.
I thought of 14 new people that I was like, I would love to have this person at this retreat. And I wrote them a personalized email and I told them, this is why I think you need to be here. I gave them specific reasons of how this would benefit their business, how they would see an ROI from this. And then I personally invited them and said, I would love for you to come to this. I'm going to be opening up a public application to my community, but for you, that application is waived. If you would like to come, you have a seat here. And you know what, Lupe? It's crazy. What is today, Friday? I did this in the last 5 days. We are down to our last 3 rooms. We have almost
Ah, that's
sold
amazing,
out.
Ellen.
I know. And it's unbelievable. I hope that this brings you encouragement that sometimes things can change for you in as short of a time as a week. You could think that your business is falling off a cliff one week, and then the next week, everything changes for you and all the momentum goes your
Mm.
way. I think a
Mm.
lot of it has to do with the energy that we carry. And as soon as I
100%.
stopped closing myself off and feeling sorry for myself and instead started
Mhm.
thinking expansively and thinking, how can I make this fun? How can I be open and invite new people and realize that this tiny little wait list isn't all of the people that exist in the world, right? They're not the deciders of my fate. Everything started to work in our favor. So I know that was a very long-winded
Oh,
story, but I hope that
and you're a
helps.
story and you're a storyteller. So,
Yeah.
well, and people respond. I respond better to stories. I think the audience responds better to stories. So thank you for
Good.
sharing that.
I'm
It's a
glad. Of
vulnerable share.
course.
So thank you.
Yes, of course.
How can people learn more about you, Ellen? How can people work with you? Tell us all
Mm.
the things.
Yeah, so thank you so much again for having me. The best place to hang out with me is every Monday on my podcast, Cubicle to CEO. So wherever you're listening to this, just search Cubicle to CEO and follow our show. Hang out with us on Monday. We ask successful founders the business questions you can't Google. So if you're interested in financially transparent case studies behind the business,
Mhm,
insights from other
mhm.
successful founders, I think you'll love our show. On Instagram, you can find me at Miss Ellen Yin. Send me a DM. Tell me you found me from this show, and I'd love to have a conversation. And then, as far as working with us, we have a private global network for small business CEOs called the C Suite. So, if you own your own business, we would love to invite you into the C
Mhm.
Suite. Again, you can just DM me the word C Suite, and I will send you more details for how you can join us.
Ellen, this was lovely. Thank you so much for being here. Thank
Thank
you for
you.
everything you shared. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.